After the defeat in the Crimean War, Russia found itself in an extremely difficult position. The state budget was exhausted, the navy was almost destroyed, and the economy required large-scale reforms. The empire understood it could no longer effectively defend its remote territories. Alaska was thousands of kilometers away from St. Petersburg. Supplies took months to arrive, and there was practically no permanent military presence there. At the same time, the British Empire was actively strengthening its position in Canada. After the unification of the Canadian colonies in 1867, Britain gained an even more stable foothold in North America. If a new war had broken out between Russia and Great Britain, Alaska would almost certainly have been captured without serious resistance. The Russian Pacific Fleet was weak, and transferring troops across half the world was practically impossible. Emperor Alexander II of Russia, who was carrying out large-scale reforms, including the abolition of serfdom in 1861, understood that the country needed money and time to recover. He decided that it was better to sell the territory to a friendly power than to lose it for nothing in war. Negotiations were conducted by the Russian envoy in Washington, Eduard Stuckel. An interesting fact, the treaty was signed on the night of March 30th, 1867. Negotiations continued until 4 o'clock in the morning. The buyer was the United States of America, which, after the Civil War, sought to strengthen its position as a future world power. The price of the deal was $7.2 million, about 2 cents per acre. In modern estimates, this is roughly $150 million, which seems like a symbolic sum for a territory covering more than 1.7 million square kilometers. However, the purchase was ridiculed within the United States. Newspapers called it Seward's Folly, after Secretary of State William Seward, who actively promoted the deal. They also used mocking nicknames like Icebox or Zoo of White Bears. President Andrew Johnson was in a difficult political situation at the time and soon faced impeachment proceedings. Society believed the money was being spent on a useless frozen wasteland. For the first several decades, Alaska did not bring significant profit. The population was small, infrastructure was absent, and the climate was harsh. But everything changed in 1896 when gold was discovered in the Klondike region. The Klondike Gold Rush began. More than 100,000 people attempted to reach the north. People crossed mountain passes at minus 40 degrees Celsius, carrying tons of equipment, and many died along the way. But those who arrived found wealth. Gold was only the beginning. In the 20th century, large deposits of copper and coal were discovered in Alaska, and in 1968, the giant Prudhoe Bay oil field. Later, the Trans-Alaska Pipeline was built, more than 1,200 kilometers long. Oil revenues became the basis of the state's budget. Moreover, Alaska residents receive annual dividends from the oil fund, a unique case in world practice. During World War II, Alaska's strategic importance increased dramatically. In 1942, Japanese forces occupied Attu and Kiska Islands in the Aleutian Chain. This was the only occupation of U.S. territory during World War II. Battles in conditions of fog and cold became some of the hardest on the Pacific front. In addition, Alaska was part of the Lend-Lease supply route to the Soviet Union. American aircraft were ferried through Alaska to Siberia. This played an important role in strengthening Soviet aviation. After the war, the Cold War began, and Alaska became a strategic outpost against the Soviet Union. The distance between Alaska and Chukotka across the Bering Strait is only about 80 kilometers. During periods of maximum tension, early warning radar stations, interceptor bases, and elements of missile defense systems were deployed there. In fact, it was one of the places where the two superpowers were closest to each other. And here's the main historical question. What would have happened if Russia had not sold Alaska? The USSR would have had a direct border with the United States. During the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis, the strategic balance might have looked very different. Perhaps instead of placing missiles in Cuba, Soviet leadership would have strengthened positions in Alaska. This would have dramatically changed the geopolitics of North America. On the other hand, retaining Alaska would have required enormous expenses from Russia in the 19th century. Economic difficulties might have intensified, reforms could have slowed down, and conflict with Britain might have become inevitable. In the end, the deal that was once called madness became one of the most profitable territorial purchases in world history. Sometimes decisions that contemporaries consider mistakes turn out to be strategic genius decades later. So what do you think? Was this a historical mistake by Russia, or a pragmatic calculation? But the debates about the sale of Alaska continue even today. Some Russian historians believe that the decision of Alexander II was not only economic, but also political. There's a theory that Russia wanted to focus more quickly on developing Siberia in the Far East, where resources and population were far more important for the country's internal development. Interestingly, the money for Alaska was not transferred immediately. The United States sent the payment to London first, and only then was the money transferred to Russia. This was related to international financial operations of that time. Part of the money was spent on building railways and purchasing industrial equipment from Europe. In fact, Alaska indirectly helped accelerate Russia's industrialization, even if only partially. But there is also a more mysterious theory. Some researchers believe Russia may not have feared war over Alaska as much as it feared possible rebellions and the difficulty of governing such a remote territory. In the 19th century, communication between St. Petersburg and Alaska was so slow that news took several months to travel. This made effective administration almost impossible. Looking at the broader picture, the sale of Alaska fits into the reform policies of Alexander II. He was simultaneously carrying out the emancipation of serfs, reforming the army, judicial system, and local government. The state needed money for modernization rather than maintaining sparsely populated territories with harsh climates. But Alaska's fate could have been completely different. Some historians believe that if large gold deposits had been discovered earlier, Russia might have refused the deal. In the mid-19th century, the world did not yet know about the region's wealth. The sale looked reasonable precisely because the territory seemed economically useless. The real turning point came after the beginning of the gold rush. More than 100,000 prospectors traveled to the Klondike. Cities in northern United States and Canada grew rapidly. Transportation routes through mountains and glaciers were built. People constructed roads manually, often using only pickaxes and shovels. Many died not only from the cold, but also from hunger, diseases, and avalanches. By the way, the gold brought huge profits mainly to the United States, not to Russia. This is often used as an argument in debates. Supporters of the deal say Russia received stable money, while opponents say the country lost future superprofits. In the 20th century, Alaska's strategic value grew even more. During World War II, the United States feared Japanese attacks on the West Coast. Because of this, military airfields began to be built in the region. One of the most famous routes ran through Alaska and Canada. American aircraft were ferried to the Soviet Union through the Lend-Lease program. Soviet pilots received ready-made fighter planes, which accelerated the recovery of Soviet aviation. The Cold War turned Alaska into one of the most militarized territories of the United States. Radar stations were placed there that could detect Soviet bombers long before they reached American territory. In fact, Alaska became the northern shield of the continent. At the same time, the economic potential of the region kept growing. The discovery of oil in 1968 at the Prudhoe Bay oil field became one of the largest energy discoveries in history. After that, construction of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline began. Workers built it in extreme conditions, through permafrost, mountains, and zones with strong seismic activity. The Alaska Permanent Fund became a unique economic experiment. Part of the oil revenue is invested, and the profits are distributed annually among state residents. This made Alaska one of the few places in the world where natural resources are directly shared with the population. From a geopolitical perspective, the sale of Alaska is often viewed today through the lens of Arctic competition. The Arctic contains enormous reserves of oil, gas, and rare metals. If Alaska had remained Russian, the map of influence in the Arctic could look completely different. Russia would have had stronger positions in the northern Pacific region. But there is another side to the story. Some economists believe that keeping Alaska could have become a heavy burden for the Russian Empire. In the 19th century, Russia was already under pressure from the Ottoman Empire, European powers, and internal economic problems. Perhaps trying to keep Alaska would have led to an even deeper crisis. History does not give a clear answer. The sale of Alaska remains one of the most discussed decisions in world diplomacy. Some call it strategic genius, others call it a historical loss of future resources. But the main question remains open. What is more important for a state? Holding territory at any cost or making pragmatic decisions for future development?